a simple 10-digit mobile number. People can just give a missed call to a number, they get a call back from the platform, they listen to content like a radio. But very importantly, I have to mention this, is that Gram Vaani's work is not anchored around technology. Gram Vaani's work is anchored around community ownership. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to build. Now, technology, content, and community mobilization are the three pillars or the three legs of this tripod, as we call it, right? We've generated probably close to about 1.2 million plus community voices on our platforms. The real change happens at a community level. When we look at our community champions, change makers, stewards, who operate on the ground, who belong to these communities, I think it's about empowering them.
Hello, hi Vijay again.
Hi again.
Before I get started, this is a very random Saturday plan that we made. What did you do as soon as you got up today?
As I got up today, I was thinking about how to get to RT Nagar.
In Bangalore traffic, I must say.
Yes, absolutely. So considering I stay pretty much on the other side of town, for me, the biggest task was to get through the traffic and reach this place in time. So that was the plan. Yeah, but of course, getting through the morning chores for Saturday. Yeah.
But what is your normal morning routine like? Do you do all of these things that people say? We meditate for 5 minutes, then we do cold shower for some time and all of that.
No, I guess it's these things happen at different stages of your journey, right? So I probably am not at that phase. I go through my normal morning chores, which involves taking I have a couple of dogs at home, so I have to tend to them. One of them is not well, so I have to take care of her, and my daughter goes to school. And I have to get ready for my morning activities in terms of work. So which probably starts at around 9:30ish. So that's about it. So I try and make some time for a morning walk with my dog, but that's about it. Yeah, I don't think I get time beyond that.
Okay, then we can probably start delving into the topic that we want to cover today, which is of our primary interest, that is social entrepreneurship. Before we were speaking, and you mentioned that you were working in a proper corporate job for quite some time before you even thought about social entrepreneurship, right? So one thing that I want to understand is why, firstly, how come, how did you figure it out? And even if you figured it out, why Gram Vaani? And you can probably speak a little bit more about Gram Vaani as well.
Yeah. No, again, as I was mentioning earlier, right? So in terms of, I think my entrepreneurship journey wasn't by plan, right? So I consider myself an accidental entrepreneur. I was in a very comfortable corporate career. I worked in the corporate world for almost 12 years post my education in 2002. And it was the standard roles of sales, business development that most of us, I guess, after doing your engineering and MBA, the normal course, right? So I was in the corporate world, in the telecom industry, starting with the equipment side, and then of course into the services side. But through that journey, I also, of course, started delving a little deeper into how technology was impacting people, how technology was impacting lives, and considering a lot of the examples of how technology was being used was around areas of entertainment and related stuff. And my question was that, are we able to see technology, or are there good examples of technology impacting people, especially the most underserved population segments, and how are they able to do it, right? And are there good examples? No, unfortunately, I did not find. This was, of course, almost 11, 12 years back, almost 13 years back, when I did not find enough examples of technology operating or impacting people at scale. Of course, there were some of them, but that's when I started probing a little deeper, started working around understanding how technology and mobile and information and communication technology especially could be used for areas of health, education, agriculture, governance. And I created my first, I created a unit in my earlier organization, which was called Life Impacting Services. So it was kind of an intrapreneurial sort of an initiative, right? And I was grateful and glad to have got the support of the organization I worked in, of the seniors. And that's how I started building this unit, probing a little deeper, working with the right stakeholders, and that built the first solutions or products, and also understanding the market fit as well. But at 2014-15 was when there was a change in the management, and I was at this juncture where I had to make a choice. Either shut that, move on with my life into a new job, or do something in the same lines. And again, because of the motivation and support from some of my seniors, I took the decision to spin that unit out from the earlier organization. And that's when I got connected with my co-founder, Dr. Aditeshwar Seth. He teaches at IIT Delhi in the Department of Computer Science. He had founded Gram Vaani in its earlier avatar in 2009 out of IIT Delhi. And that's 2014-15 is when Adi and me got connected through a common friend. And that's where we decided we were pretty much walking on the same path and decided to join hands. And that's how Gram Vaani 2.0, as we call it, was born. It's the legal entities Onion Dev Technologies Private Limited, but in the market we're still known as Gram Vaani. Right? So that's how my journey as a social entrepreneur began. Again, as I said, I did not think it was a social entrepreneurship. I did not think about getting into this sort of a space, but it was at a juncture where I took the leap of faith. I just decided to take the plunge, not knowing what was in store. Just said, let's figure out what happens, right? So, interestingly, I read up, somebody gifted me a poster, or I don't know, somebody gave me a poster at that point where it said, take the leap of faith and the net shall appear, right? So it was just a random, sort of a decision, and I said, okay, let's figure out, right? So that's how my kind of the journey with Gram Vaani began.
That is interesting. So, for somebody who has not heard about Gram Vaani until now, how would you define Gram Vaani and explain it to them? Okay, this is what we do, and this is what we impact, and this is our scale. How do you tell them?
Sure. Again, Gram Vaani's core objective has always been about addressing 2 or 3 critical problems, right? So one is information asymmetry, right? We know that conventional media operates top down. It does not address the contextual information needs of communities, especially low income population groups, right? So it also does not provide action. A lot of the new age media also does not provide actionable information to citizens or communities, right? That can help people take informed decisions around whether it's their health or livelihood or agriculture, education, governance, etc. Two is the lack of conversation spaces within communities, because we're all obviously exposed to social media, many other forms of media, which throws up so much and more information than we need, right? And it obviously helps us in terms of the information, in terms of the taking informed decisions. But a big part of our population, unfortunately, does not have those conversation spaces. A lot of our decision making is taken because in the way that we take is because we have people who inspire us, we have people who inform us, we have people who we follow and understand from, right? So there's a shared understanding of many of the problems. But I think many of these communities do not have those spaces, right? So how do you build contextual understanding? How do you build conversation spaces that help people reflect, build an opinion, share their stories, share their grievances, etc.? So there are no such conversation spaces. Third, very importantly, is that organizations in the markets want to connect to these communities. Now, social media has challenges because it creates a lot of echo chambers. It also obviously has barriers in terms of literacy, digital literacy, people needing smartphones. And while smartphone penetration has grown considerably over the past decade, but we would still acknowledge that it's not just about access to information or access to tools or affordability, but also in terms of ability and agency to use many of these technology tools, right? So markets want to connect with these population segments. population groups, but there are no credible or there are no reliable, responsible channels that can help them connect with these audiences, right? So, and how do community voices and insights that come from the ground, what we call as ground truth, how does that help organizations take decisions around program design, whether it is development sector partners, government bodies, social enterprises, markets as well? How do they listen to communities and take decisions based on these voices, based on their demands, right? And how does policy making listen to these voices and take more informed decisions on what policies to be drafted and implemented? So these are some couple of important problem statements that Gram Vaani has been working on. And what we do is that we marry technology, to these contexts, right? How do you leverage technology and information and communication technology specifically to build these inclusive conversation spaces for communities? How do you build their capacity to drive engagement? How do you build the capacity to collectivize around local issues, right? And use these tools in a responsible way, use these tools to help themselves to solve their own problems, right? We strongly believe that we do not understand, most of us do not understand the lived challenges, experiences, or issues of many of these communities. So we cannot go and believe that we can solve their problems. So I think our role is limited to providing them with the tools, with helping ensure that technology does not lead to more exclusion. And more importantly, how do you build their capacity so that they can use technology in a way that can help them solve their own problems, right? So that's how Gram Vaani has been operating at the intersection of technology, community, and development.
It's quite interesting. I think I really like this point where you mentioned it's not just about providing them with the access to internet or the technology and the tools, but it's also about enabling them with enough ability and agency to operate well with
That's
what
right.
they have, right? Could you give me an example of how Gram Vaani has been able to make this happen? Like, for example, um, do you run awareness programs, or is it more like even after running an awareness program, the insights that we collect from here, is it passed on to the government bodies, or if it's passed on to corporate, how exactly is this information used? It's just to understand better.
Yeah. So the theory of change, as we call it, right, is based on, as I said, the tools, of course, are the backend. The technology is the underlying, system that supports all this. But the more important part is, how do you drive conversations within communities? It's not just about providing information in local language or in formats like voice, which we primarily work on, because voice naturally leapfrogs a lot of challenges of literacy, digital literacy, speaking in their own language, right? These are some important nuts and bolts and parts of the whole process. But very importantly, it's about how do you create these hyperlocal community-based conversation spaces, right? What we call as digital community commons. Um, so these spaces are accessible even through simple feature phones. So people within communities, like for example, a district level platform or a community level platform is accessible through a simple 10-digit mobile number. People can just give a missed call to a number, they get a call back from the platform, they listen to content like a radio, right? And all the programs are, it's all voice, and it's in the local language, and it's content co-created with the communities and with partners who bring in the relevant domain experience. Uh, but very importantly, when we create these conversation spaces and provide information, the trigger or the objective is to drive engagement, drive conversation, saying that people are listening to content, sharing their views, sharing their perspectives, sharing their opinions.
For example, what could be these content?
It could be on local government schemes, local entitlements, or it could be around government programs that are, around agriculture. It could be on social issues, for example, women and land rights, right? It could be on local challenges or issues that the communities are facing. For example, a primary healthcare center has not been operating for the past 15 days, right? Leaving a lot of people, not having access to medical facilities, right? During times like COVID, it could be calls for SOS. It's SOS calls for help, saying that we need help, and there are people who are impacted by this. We need information, more clarity around how do we get vaccination, right? So different forms, right? So for example, even in terms of agriculture and climate, a farmer wants to understand as to, has anybody faced a similar problem, right? He or she is facing, and are there anybody else who's been able to solve that particular problem, right? So it's about sharing stories, experiences, grievances, perspectives, right? Think of it almost like hyperlocal social media platforms,
Interesting.
right? So
But
that's
why do they not do this on a Facebook group or something? Like, I know that people are getting connected. Like, of course, there is a barrier in terms of
yes.
usage of technology and how far the reach is. But um, how is Gram Vaani being able to tap into the parts where the social media has not been covered
Yeah.
yet?
So technology is one part, as I said, right? So
Hmm.
it is again barriers of literacy, digital literacy, or even more importantly, I think even if people are and more people are getting connected to many of these spaces like Facebooks and the WhatsApp groups, and obviously there are benefits of it. But I think very importantly, as I said, in terms of getting actionable information, right? Uh,
Interesting.
how do
Actionable
you take
information.
how do you make use of that information, right? So people, the internet will throw a dump of information for you, but are you able to understand the context? Are you able to understand and use it in a way that's useful for you? But very importantly, I have to mention this, is that Gramvani's work is not anchored around technology. Gramvani's work is anchored around community ownership, and that's fundamentally what we're trying to build, right? Now, how do you do that? Now, technology, content, and community mobilization are the three pillars, or the three, uh, you know, the legs of this tripod, as we call it, right? While technology is great, technology keeps evolving. You have AIs of the world and stuff that we keep using and improving the overall user experience using voice and various other inclusive channels. That's one part. The second part is content, which means we create content in local languages, local dialects, right? Ensuring that it's relatable for people, right? Uh, on various thematic areas and very interesting formats like drama episodes, expert interviews, right? Many other formats that make people, it's not just your drab, monotonous information, but very interesting formats that help people stay connected and engaged. The third and most important part of this tripod is community mobilization. Now, how is that done? And that's reflection of the community ownership. That's done with the help of our community champions, community change makers. We call them today. We are calling them as community development entrepreneurs or community stewards. These are people who are identified from these communities. We train them, we help them, we build their capacity to anchor these community platforms. They're trained to popularize the platform or the community engagement access channels. They create hyperlocal information. Think of them almost like community journalists or citizen journalists, right? They engage with local authorities. They record their views, opinions. They escalate local issues. They collectivize local community members on driving action on, for example, there's a community level problem like the primary healthcare center I mentioned to you about. Then how do they collectivize these voices and use that as an evidence to escalate it to local authorities and say that there's been no the primary healthcare center has not been operating for the past 15 days, right? And when they escalated with the help of these voice recordings and they created almost like a body of evidence, it not naturally drives accountability within the local systems, because they are listening to people's voices, they are listening to people's grievances. And these community anchors who are trained to collectivize communities around these issues also have the ability to escalate it, or use parallel and channels like your Facebooks and WhatsApp to actually let more and more people know and bring them together on
Interesting.
these challenges. So that's why most of our platform and every platform of ours is anchored around these community champions. We believe that if sustainable development has to happen at a community level, it has to be done by communities. It has to be anchored within and for communities, right? So that's how our work sort of
Got it.
happens.
And no, that was my next question actually. Like, how do you figure out what are these problems which needs to be solved, right? Community champions is a very interesting thing. But when you said the content would be prepared for a certain topic, how would these content get filtered? Is it basis how many community champions have raised it to you? Or is it a push from a certain government bodies or a certain corporate initiatives where they say, hey, this is CSR activity and we have to do this? Like, how does that work?
So it happens both, bottom up and top down, right? So the way top down, program, design or development happens is, for example, the way Gram Vaani's network has operated, we call it a network a federated network of community media platforms. Today we call it as a federated network of community change makers. Now each of these change makers or community platforms are operating for and by communities, right? These are conversation spaces, voice-based, technology-led conversation spaces. Uh, and hence, we have a captive user base, now whether through our community change makers or the platforms, people who are engaging with our platforms on various topics, right? So each of these district or community level instances have specific topics that are operating. Like for example, a district level platform has programs on agriculture, health, local governance issues, etc. The neighboring district could have something very different, right? Uh, there are two ways that we design or decide on what programs are needed. One is the top down. When we work with partners, since for example, a partner wants to do a survey campaign or a behavior change campaign around women and land rights, right? How would they do it? We would need to obviously reach women across these different geographies. So we know that our platforms, we are able to engage with women around different topics, so we can run this campaign across different districts. So we co-design this campaign with the partner around this particular topic and run it across these different districts. And with the help of our community change makers or community champions, we're able to engage with the local community women around these topics. So it's not just your tech-led surveys that are running, but also facilitated discussions by our community change makers through a focus group discussion or interviews, etc. And we are gathering insights and inputs from women who may not have their own devices, who otherwise would be excluded by conventional tech-based approaches for collecting data or engaging. So that's one approach where we are co-designing or co-creating campaigns or programs with partners and running them on these platforms. And we know that they could operate across different instances. The second approach is when it comes bottom up, which means when our community volunteers or community change makers naturally trigger conversations around local issues, right, which they believe is important for their community, right? So we run programs like Paksh Vipaksh, right? So which means it's listening to both
For
sides,
and against,
for and
yeah.
against, right?
Yeah.
So this could be something that's triggered by our, one particular community champion, right? On, for example, on some challenges around natural resource management or raising a Manrega request, right? So they trigger a conversation within the local community instance, and they're able to mobilize different voices. So it's both. So we have programs that come top down. There are programs that come bottom up based on community requirements and needs. There are also programs that are initiated with the help of local authorities who might want to do certain campaigns, surveys, awareness programs, behavior change interventions, research interventions.
Picking off from where we dropped off, I think I was asking you about how these community champions are chosen. And while choosing a community champion, what are the metrics that you choose? Or do you choose them, or do they volunteer? How does it work?
Yeah, again, as I said, when we work with communities, right? So the choice of which geographies, which communities we work in is not, is also influenced by partnerships, projects that we might have to, that we operate with or work on, or even certain geographies where we see and have historically seen the need for in terms of the gaps that are there, right? So, based on some of those factors or parameters, we do decide to go into a certain geography. And also, if we have been operating in neighboring districts or nearby geographies, then that becomes an interesting or an important sort of a factor to help us expand into neighboring communities as well, right? So when we do that, when we go into these communities, we as I said, we work with local grassroots organizations. We interact with local stakeholders like your panchayat members, community members, etc. We run these community workshops where we interact with the people to understand their problems, their challenges. We obviously do a bit of background study, a bit of secondary research as well, and the information that many other partners might have based on the work they may have done in those geographies, to understand the demographics, understand the kind of challenges they face, etc., so that we are better informed. And also, when we have these conversations, we are more contextual in terms of the discussions. So as part of that process, we do see people, when we explain to them the process and the approach, there are people who volunteer, who come forward and say that they would want to be part of this initiative. Uh, Second is, we also take references from the local stakeholders, whether it's the panchayats or even the grassroots level organizations we work with. They have their own field resources or field team members. So we identify some of them to be part of the effort as well. So that's how we kind of identify. A lot of people also volunteer, as I mentioned.
Got it. That's quite interesting, right? Okay. So if I have to ask, what is the difference between an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur? What would you say?
Well, I think for me, every entrepreneur is working to solve one particular problem, right? So, an entrepreneurship is about finding, about ideas and solutions with a market fit that solve problems, right? And there are problems all over. There are across and everything that we see in our day-to-day lives. There are problems, and people who are passionate about solving one particular problem is an entrepreneur, right? Uh, Now, every entrepreneur has a responsibility of, when you look at business, right? So the objective of business is to be able to generate profits, generate revenue, generate profits, and the profits should be benefiting the different stakeholders or shareholders of the organization, right, of the business. That's the primary objective of any business. Now, in a social entrepreneurship, now while the problem statements that you are solving, uh, you know, can have much more social implications, right? Implications which are more socially inclined, right? So you're solving problems not of one small particular, group of people, and with only a with only a profit objective, but you're looking at solving larger set of problems, right? Or a bigger set of, size of a problem, right? So which impact the society on the whole. And profit is not the primary motive. So social entrepreneurship, again, I would say an entrepreneur. So whether you do it for profit or not for profit is again a business model or a sustainability model in many ways, right? So even a person who is running an NGO, running a social enterprise, which is which is a Section 18, for example, Section 8, for example, it does not have to is not necessarily that person is also an entrepreneur, right? Now, whether they do it for profit or not for profit is the business model decision, right? So that's an important aspect to remember. So social entrepreneurs obviously look at solving, problems that impact the society at large. It could be on health, on environment, on climate, on gender, on governance, on social issues, right? Education, livelihood, youth, so many different aspects. Um, that's the difference primarily. But an entrepreneur at the end of the day is somebody who solves a problem.
Like if I were to explain this to my grandmother, saying, I'm running a social enterprise and this is what I do, what would you say? How do you explain to your grandmother?
I would still say that I'm running a business, right? Depending, of course, whether I'm doing it as a for-profit entity or a not-for-profit entity. But I'm running an organization to solve a particular problem, and you have to be able to explain what is that problem that you're solving, right?
Yeah.
Now, as I said, now whether you're doing it for-profit or not-for-profit is how you are able to sustain that initiative, right? Sustain that effort. Some problems need a longer runway in terms of solving that problem, right? Some of them need a much more narrower approach to solving a problem, right? Some of them can, need to be taken at scale, but some of them can operate even at a local level.
Got it. Okay, I think the next natural question is around, why do we need social entrepreneurs if we already have NGOs and government schemes to take care of this?
See, as I said, NGOs now, there are certain type of problems that uh, need a different sort of an approach to solve, right?
For example.
For example, maternal and child health, right? You have to be able to look at, if you look at an aspect of immunization, right? It is a social responsibility. It is a responsibility of the society, of the systems, to ensure that women and children are provided with vaccination and immunization at the right time, right? That's the society's responsibility, right? So in these kind of cases, right? So it has to be the responsibility of organizations which are operating as NGOs, right, or civil society organizations who work in collaboration with the governments, who have a responsibility of ensuring these women and mothers and children are vaccinated, so that the efficacy and efficiency of these programs are ensured, right? To ensure that the most underserved, the most marginalized user groups are educated, are informed, are connected to the systems that deliver these services. Which is why each one of them forms an important pillar of the society, right? Whether it's the NGOs, who play a very critical role in bridging that last mile gap, ensuring that the most underserved, most marginalized are connected to the services that they deserve or they are entitled to, right? They play an important role in driving accountability, asking the right questions, demanding for the right answers, right? Because many of the people that we're talking about who are being serviced by this ecosystem may not have the voice, may not have the understanding, may not have the agency to be able to ask those questions, to have an agency to be able to demanding for those answers. So the NGOs, the civil society, plays a very important role in not just bridging the service gap, but also in terms of taking those voices and amplifying them to ensure that their voices are represented at the right forums. The governments have a responsibility to ensure, with the schemes that you're talking about, right? At this juncture, I would probably like to highlight, right, that while governments obviously create these schemes, these entitlements, these government programs, policies that are made, the in a participatory democracy, which India is, right, uh, it is largely a representative democracy, which means we identify people who represent us in the decision making spaces, right? And that does not always mean that every segment of the society is represented fairly, right? So in a participatory democracy, for example, there is the pre-legislative consultation policy, the PLCP, which was formed in 2014 by the government. So this particular policy provided a framework as part of which every ministry should be taking the feedback, should be taking the voices of the citizens, of the public, while they build policies, right? Those insights, the feedback that's coming from the communities, from the public, should be incorporated as part of the policy making process before it is taken to the to the parliament for approval, right? Um, it was done with a great intent, right? This is the whole approach to deliberative democracy.
Okay.
It's not just consultation, it's just not asking questions, but it's also about how do you deliberate, how do you take inputs, how do you debate these points and educate the communities about what policies you're making. The policy needed that every ministry should put out the draft policy for 30 days and ensure that they create channels for people to provide feedback. Now, great intent, but this does not get executed in the way it should.
Or even
right?
if it is, it's probably biased because.
Yeah, it's biased. It's also not So currently, the problem with PLCP is that it's not mandatory, right? It's not supported by legal structures, right? So it is and governments are also not obligated to take that feedback and incorporate them. Not there channels for them to let the public know as to what part was taken and what part was not taken and why. So while PLCP was a great intent, unfortunately, it's not backed by the legal structures, right? That's having said that, that's the kind of approach that we're looking at when we are saying that government creates schemes, builds policies. How much of it is done by listening to communities? How much of it those policies are designed taking into account the people's real challenges and problems? Or is policy making done in silos? Is policy making done without having taken into consideration the people's inputs or problems? And policies also have to be contextualized to the needs of communities, right? Or the citizens to whom it has to serve.
Yeah. So if I have to stack this entire thing, so we'll first have government schemes or policies which are made. On top of that, we have NGOs which kind of try to bridge the gap within the communities. And on top of that stack is where we have the social entrepreneurs coming in. Is that stack correct?
So it's not exactly a linear stack, right? So, I mean, organizations operate at different levels. So organizations operate at different spectrums. So there are civil society bodies or organizations who work right from supporting organizations with policy making, taking inputs from communities back to the governments to create these policies.
The entire loop?
Yeah, the entire loop, and implementing them, and also monitoring and evaluation. So governments are there. There are some policies which again do incorporate some of this feedback collection mechanism. They are also supported by some of the constitutional structures like Gram Sabhas, right, or even municipal bodies or social audits, which are there already, existing structures that are there, and governments do have processes through which they can implement the full stack. Which is why I'm saying that it's not a linear cycle. It's not like A, B, C. It's not, and it's also not sequential, right? Social enterprises, for example, like Gram Vaani, operates, from the demand side of the equation, which means we are creating that demand. We are building the awareness of communities. We are educating them on many of these policies, schemes, driving conversations around them, so that people build a shared understanding of these issues and are able to collectivize, reflect, and ask the right questions. Again, supported by these community volunteer, community change maker structures. The objective is that if communities are better informed, they can ask the right questions, they can demand for accountability, and that pushes the supply side or the governments or the other service providers to respond to those demands, right? Whether in the form of access to services or improving the quality of services.
Got it. And we also spoke about non-profit organization and for-profit social organizations, right? How do you think doing good and making money can go hand in hand, to put it very bluntly? Because to some degree, when we are looking at the capitalistic way of the companies are being run and stuff, there is not much importance given to, hey, is it actually causing a good impact on a larger scale? But the more emphasis is on making profits, like we discussed previously. But when we are running a social enterprise for profit, how does that work, and what are the channels in which the income is
So again, I think we'll have to remember that when we are talking about building a business, right, and when as an entrepreneur, we have to be able to look at whether there is a market fit or not, right? When we are solving a problem, creating a solution or a product or a service, the question is that who is willing to pay for it?
Correct.
Right? Is there a market which is willing to pay for those services? Right? Only then does it create a proper for-profit business opportunity. Right? If it is a service that needs philanthropy, that needs government systems to support, that needs to take a grant-based approach, because that's in a way the ecosystem's responsibility in some ways, right? And it's not right, or there is no system where people can pay for those services. Then you decide that it has to be whether it's a not-for-profit or a philanthropic-led or a grant-led sort of a model. So that decision has to be taken. So so even when you're starting to build a social enterprise with a for-profit sort of an objective, the reason would be saying that how do you ensure that it is sustainable, that there is a market fit, there are people who are willing to pay for your services or products, right? And who are those people who are willing to pay for the services or products, right? Is it, like, for example, the markets which are willing to pay because they want to deliver those, they see a value in terms of reaching those segments, like in the case of Gram Vaani, it's not the end users who are paying for the services, right? It's the market which is paying, which is, whether it is, social enterprises who want to engage with this audience, governments who want to engage with this audience. development sector partners who want to interact with this population, they leverage our platforms for outreach, engagement, designing programs, right? We bring in our professional capabilities and services and along with our technology to deliver those services. So it depends on who is paying for what, and is there a value in that, right? Again, as I said, when you're looking at a market-based approach, can money and social purpose go hand in hand? It can, right? But the intent and the objectives are very important. What is the intent? What is the intent of starting this business? You can't be starting a social enterprise with an intent that you want to create profits and create large sort of amounts of money for your shareholders. The primary objective is impact, right? Gram Vaani Gram Vaani, plows back whatever margins that we make based on the services that we provide back into the building and sustaining the community platforms, right? So it's about giving back to that ecosystem, giving back to the community. And the primary objective is to be able to sustain the business, sustain it in a way that it's not dependent just on grants or on philanthropic money or any other channels, but also do you find ways to sustain it beyond just the short or medium phase.
So for social enterprises in this case, right, who really is the customer? Like, is it the person who pays or is the person who is impacted? Who is the customer?
So in our case, for example, right, we are looking at so in any business, it is the customer is the one who pays for the service, right? The end user did not ask for this, right? And the end user did not come and say that I need this, right? So what you are doing is that there are organizations who want to connect and engage with these communities, right? What we are doing is that we are creating a responsible network of community platforms or community anchored by community change makers, which help the ecosystem to connect with this audience, right? So we are solving the problem of connecting communities to institutions, communities to organizations, right? And we are creating those technology-enabled conversation spaces and responsible conversation spaces so that there's sharing of knowledge, information, and services between both these stakeholders.
Got it. And when profit is not the scoreboard, right? Like, how do social enterprises track their progress? Like for the other enterprises, like we spoke about, profits could be one of the scoreboards they're tracking or they're looking at. And like in this case, if I'm assuming right, it could be community impact and the reach that we have. That could be one aspect. But is there any other way in which you can measure to what degree a social enterprise is growing?
So again, as a for-profit social enterprise that we've been so far, we have to ensure our margins, or not margins, but at least to stay positive. At least to ensure break even, to ensure that we are positive, we're able to plow back and use these margins or profits to sort of scale and perform better, innovate in terms of our operations, right? So the profitability and growth are important parameters as a for-profit social enterprise, but more so as a impact focused. Impact comes first for us, right? But at the end of the day, revenue has to drive impact and not impact driving revenue, right? So which means that you have to ensure that you're sustainable, you have revenues, you have business, you have margins, and you're able to use that to grow, scale, innovate, and perform better. So that's an important aspect to remember. The second part is in terms of what are the parameters that we evaluate, or a social enterprise evaluates. When we are impact focused, there are clear outcome indicators that any social enterprise works for, right?
Okay.
Works towards.
That are?
It could be on saying that, okay, now in the case of Gram Vaani, these are numbers in terms of reach. For example, Gram Vaani has touched about 5 million people so far, right? We've operated our community platforms across 100 plus districts, right? Largely covering central, northern, and some parts of South India as well, right? So some parts of central eastern India as well. Number of partners we have worked with. We have worked with more than 250 plus partners. We are a great example of a horizontal, which means that We operate across different themes like health, agriculture, education, climate, gender, livelihood, youth, right, across the spectrum. And our and one of the key indicators or parameters is how much of community engagement are we able to drive, which means community voices, right? That's a very, very important parameter for us. How many community voices have we been able to generate? Now, these community voices could be in the form of questions, grievances, opinions, right? And we've generated probably close to about 1.2 million plus community voices on our platforms, and that have contributed to improving program design, in terms of policy making, in terms of delivering better services, right? So think of us almost like a highway, right? We can tell you saying that how many organizations have leveraged our this network of platforms, how many health-based organizations, education-based organizations, livelihood or agriculture-based organizations have leveraged our platforms for connecting with communities.
More like an enabler.
Enabler. But can we say in terms of how many lives have we saved, how many children have got educated, right? Those are outcome indicators probably we don't have right now.
Those are like, secondary impact of what you.
No, but that would be the ideal, right? So ideally, if we could really frame our impact, indicators in terms of how many people have directly been impacted in terms of jobs, in terms of how much of wealth has it created, how much of income has it improved, right? But that's the shift that we are now making.
Okay.
Right? In terms of when we are talking about shifting from a network of community media platforms to a network of community change makers, we are saying that, okay, these community change makers, we probably, say that, okay, within the next 1 year, we want to have about 1,000 plus community change makers or community entrepreneurs, community development entrepreneurs, train and create livelihood opportunities for them where they're leveraging our community-based technology tools for outreach and engagement with communities, for responsible data collection, for advertising and lead generation support for social enterprises, right, or for helping communities collectivize around government schemes and entitlements for grievance addressal, right? So one parameter is saying that how many community change makers are we able to support with alternative livelihood opportunities, how much does this impact their own income and their livelihood channels, right? Create aspirational livelihood opportunities for them. How many people are they able to impact in terms of grievance addressal, access to social entitlements, right? How much are we able to impact in terms of programs like we have great evaluation programs that we have supported, and our own programs have been evaluated as well, where we have been able to show improvements in terms of health indicators, right? We have been able to show improvement in terms of access to many of these entitlements, right? So we want to be able to frame and support many of these indicators and have a much clearer and stronger list of outcome indicators that we will work with. In the areas of climate and natural resource management, something that we're investing a lot of efforts on, right? So there we are obviously looking at water resources, right? In terms of drought and rainfall, in terms of improvement, in terms of cropping patterns for farmers, in terms of carbon credits, for example, right? So there's a lot of work happening in that space as well. So all this powered by participatory models, community-based insights and voices, right? And that sort of building patterns. One is individual level grievances or community voices, which are used by and leveraged by these community volunteers or champions who help solve local issues. But at a macro level, when we see our network of platforms, when these community voices come up, we see patterns emerging.
Like patterns,
right? Patterns as in, for example, in certain geographies of Bihar or a certain district of Bihar, we see a lot of women raising grievances saying that they were not registered for the government scheme for, BD workers, right? And we find that, okay, this particular district is having that problem, and we see a lot of community voices coming up on that problem. So what we can do is that we are able to channel our energies and efforts to support our community volunteers who are obviously trained to engage with local authorities to submit a petition, submit a requests to the local authorities saying that we have an evidence of about 500 women who have not been registered for the scheme, right? And how they support the local authorities in running a registration mela and actually getting all those women registered for that scheme and getting the benefits they're supposed to be and they're entitled to as part of that program. So that is the patterns that we are talking about that emerge based on community voices. That's what can help with policy making. That's what can help organizations and even investors, funders to decide saying that where should funds be invested, on where should the funds be invested in a very contextual manner rather than take a one size fits all sort of an approach.
Very interesting. And it sounds to be very fulfilling when you talk about the impact side of things, especially for a social entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
And
When you listen to those stories, right? So when you listen to the stories, we have hundreds of stories, thousands of stories that come from our platform, right? When you hear those stories, that's probably the most.
If you could tell us
fulfilling
one
part.
or two.
I mean, many, right? So we hear pretty much every day of how farmers have benefited from access to government schemes, right? We have seen women who did not have an understanding of their rights, in terms of land, they could demand from, and they're entitled to, right? We've had many cases around workforce and labor rights. For example, one of our platforms called Gram Vaani, which focuses on building an understanding of the rights for the unorganized workforce. Many of the workers in, for example, in the Delhi NCR region, they would raise grievances or concerns that they were thrown out of their jobs without notice. They were not, or they are not given their employee cards, right, or benefits relating to ESI and PF, right. When they raise these grievances or these concerns, our community champions or change makers are able to collectivize those groups, and then they're able to raise those requests, take legal support, or escalate it to local authorities or to the concerned stakeholders and support them in terms of resolving those problems. A great example that we have, in fact, it happened a few years back, is when one of our platforms, again, workforce related platforms in Tamil Nadu, which had women who were working in these textile and garment factories, right? One of the women workers, literally cried and recorded her story of of a problem that she was having to relieve herself behind a bale of cotton in the factory, because the number of toilets that were there in the factory was just very limited, right? And there were many women who had to use the restroom within just a period of half an hour, right? When she cried and recorded that particular, her challenge on our platform, a lot of women then obviously validated that, said that yes, it is a problem. Many other people, including drinking water facilities, are not available. This was obviously caught by one of the media, organizations. It got, escalated as an article on media. The state Women's Rights Commission, the Human Rights Commission, obviously got a whiff of it. They ordered an audit of almost close to hundreds of factories in that particular region, right? And within a couple of months, companies or these organizations had to build facilities, had to build more toilets, and women then came back on our platform recording saying that how this change happened, and now they're much better off in terms of access to facilities, right? This is just one example of how powerful community voices can be.
That's quite interesting. And what does an early stage social enterprise look like? So when you're starting, is it more like an experiment for you, or do you start thinking about it like a business? Like, at least how did you start?
Again, for me, as I said, it was a situation where we were building, on something that my co-founder Adi had started already, which was Gram Vaani in its earlier avatar. So I think, based on what we had done earlier, me and my team had done earlier, we were building on, then subsequently building on what Gram Vaani had already achieved so far. Gram Vaani had started off, as a community radio station tech provider, right? Building a great product called Grins, which was used by NGO partners who would get licenses from the government for community radio stations, right? but then we pivoted into a mobile-based platform. We then joined hands. We started Gram Vaani in a new avatar. We evolved in terms of the technology and the model, etc. So for me, it was a different sort of a journey, But for whether it is a social enterprise or a standard commercial enterprise, I think the approach is again very similar, right? So it is not. It's about what problem statement are you wanting to solve, right? What is the product or solution that you're building or working on, or the idea that you want to sort of implement, right? You create an MVP, right? Which means that the minimum viable product or solution. You try and test it out, you get feedback, you try and rehash and sort of improve it. But most importantly, is there a product market fit or not?
Okay, let's say I want to start a social venture tomorrow. What are the 3 questions I should ask myself?
What is the problem that you're wanting to? So you don't decide that you want to start a social enterprise. You first identify what the problem is, right? So you are bothered by one particular problem. Now, whether it is a social problem or a normal business problem,
okay,
that's what defines whether you are going to be a social. So if you're very particular that I want to work in the social space, then you look at larger social issues, right? And I'm sure there are tons of them, right, around.
Yeah.
So then the question is saying that which areas do you want to look at? Do you want to look at agriculture? You want to look at gender? You want to look at governance? You want to look at climate, right?
Is it necessary for you to be a subject matter expert before you even start?
No, you don't. Of course, being a subject matter expert, nobody is an expert in any of these things. It also starts, the desire or intent to be an entrepreneur starts well before the process of becoming an entrepreneur, right? It starts with that kida in your mind saying that I need to do something about this problem. I'm bothered about it. I'm reading more about it. I'm trying to find more about it. I'm talking to more people about it, right? And then you're saying that, okay, this could be solved by this approach, and you're trying to do some research, saying that is there somebody else who's doing something similar, or what are the solutions available in the market? Is there enough space for more people to come in, right? Is there enough market? Are people willing to pay for it? And then you come to the situation of saying that, okay, now do I have the wherewithal or the technical ability or the domain expertise to build solutions around it, right? And then you either work with somebody who complements or supplements that your capacities, and then you build solutions, and then you become a social entrepreneur, right? So the process starts well in advance of
in the world of Instagram, it is kind of different. That's why I asked you this question.
It is. That's what I'm saying. That it again, even in the world of Instagram, right? So even if you want to start something, that seed is there in your mind before. Well, you don't suddenly wake up one fine day and say that, okay, I'm going to do this. Right? I want to become a social entrepreneur. I'm going to start today. It doesn't work that way, right? I mean, maybe I'm from the previous generation, but I'm saying that, it's, the world of Instagrams, the world of social media, the world of internet, digital channels, you could do a lot of stuff, upfront, on the fly, go with it, fail fast, right? Maybe the collateral damage also is not much, right? But when you want to become a social entrepreneur, when you want to work with communities on the ground, solving people's problems, there are many aspects at stake, right? And so you have to be cognizant about that. You have to be responsible about that as well, right? So communities, people are not guinea pigs, right? So you cannot experiment, test, and move on if it doesn't work. So you have a responsibility towards the people who you work with for. Right? And that's the big thing that comes with entrepreneurship. It's not just us, me, my ego, right? So it's a lot of other factors that come in. One thing that entrepreneurship does teach you is humility, to know that you can change nothing in the world, right? At the end of the day, you're doing it because you are learning, because you are benefiting.
Your choice, boss. Like nobody asked you.
Yeah, nobody asked you. People are willing to open up their doors. People are willing to try your services, products, and so it's the other way around. You're not doing any favor to anybody. It's actually the world doing a favor to you.
Got it. And when it comes to a regular business, right? We know that there is a concept of accelerator. Then you have your VCs who come in at a certain stage of enterprise and stuff. How does it work for a social enterprise? The same way? Like when do the investors come in? Like what kind of investors come in, even if they do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in the social sector, there are obviously accelerators. There are organizations who play a very important role in terms of supporting you, in terms of providing the spaces, the environment, opportunities to collaborate, right? So there's a big ecosystem, and there are many good, very inspiring players who have been supporting and creating those spaces. So in terms of investment and funding, obviously you have, uh, uh, again, depending on what type of a social entrepreneur, whether it's a not-for-profit or for-profit. If you're a not-for-profit, you look at CSR, you look at philanthropic, grants, philanthropic funding, right? So these are different ways that you have to raise money, or retail, retail fundraising efforts, etc. But if you are a for-profit social enterprise, besides, of course, your business revenues and business income, you also can leverage a lot of innovation grants, right, which again are made available by many of these philanthropic or impact investors or accelerators. So you can leverage those innovation grants. But you also, when you look at investment, you have impact investors who provide equity investment, like a conventional commercial equity investor, where you have valuation, you are valued for your business and income, but you also have this important aspect of impact. So it's not just your financials that matter, but also in terms of what impact are you able to generate and achieve. So as impact investors, that's the additional aspect that they would look at. And there are impact investors who are focused on multiple themes. Some of them are very focused on certain themes, right? So yeah, you do have
Usually,
impact investors.
investors are institutional investors or individual investors.
There are both. There are both. There are both individual investors as well, right? Who HNIs, ultra HNIs, who do come in with these angel funds, which are again impact focused. Um, but there are many institutional players as well,
Got it.
who again focus on impact investments.
Interesting. So, the next question that I have is, when it comes to a social enterprise, right? What is harder, getting your community to trust you or getting your funders to trust you? Which one is harder?
I mean, it's not the question of if or, right? So I think both are important. If you are able to generate
Which is harder?
I mean, as I said, if you are able to garner, the support and participation of the communities who you work with, if you are able to garner the trust of the communities who you work with, it automatically reflects in your impact and reflects in your work, reflects in the sort of objectives that you're trying to achieve, which automatically means that your investors are happy, right? Because then they're seeing the sort of impact that they want to see. So I think it ultimately, it's they who you're focused. Everybody else is incidental, right? Now you could be working without investors, you could be working without other funding mechanisms, right? But you're not there if if the communities are not there. You don't exist, right? So your very
They're the
purpose,
core of it.
your very purpose of existence as an entity is because of those communities. If they don't, then you don't exist, right? So I think it starts there.
Got
As
it.
I said, you're not doing a favor for them, right? So yeah.
So, do you think social enterprises sometimes end up doing government's job? The job that government was supposed to do?
See, I mean, governments operate at scale, right? Operate at a very, very large scale. Right? They have many things to do and achieve and meet, and it's influenced by different factors, right? Whether political, whether systemic, whether they have to align with constitutional principles. They have to look at economic factors, right? So many things that the government has to work for, and in this process, there are programs, schemes, initiatives that they take. Uh, but when they're doing that, there is very little uh, opportunity or space for innovation to happen. It's very difficult, right? Uh, there's not enough luxury to do that as well, right? Both because of resource constraints, bandwidth constraints, capacity constraints, different aspects. So this is where I think a lot of social enterprises, entrepreneurship in general, does play a very critical role. The markets play a very critical role, right? So in the social ecosystem, The social enterprises, the NGOs, again, uh, play a very important role in terms of building out these innovations, whether in terms of process innovation, in terms of product or service innovation, or in terms of policy innovations, right? They're able to do that in smaller pockets, right? They start off in smaller pockets, and that then becomes good evidence for then working with the governments to see how they can scale those innovations
To some
or get
degree,
the
this could
government.
also be the purpose of government grants that they provide, right?
Exactly. So
To
that's
enable the government to expand.
exactly. So governments do not have that ability to do it, or the capacity to do it. So these organizations can do it on the ground, bring their own expertise, bringing about technology, domain expertise on different parameters. They bring in international experience, right? All these factors, they're able to bring in that innovation and then work with the governments to scale it. If any innovation in the social space has to scale, it has to be with the government, right? There aren't too many examples, I would say. I may be wrong, but in terms of which have existed as parallel structures.
Okay.
And the best innovations that will scale will be what work towards improving existing government systems and capabilities, or government structures, rather than try to create parallel structures. If you're trying to create parallel structures, it often fails. It often, it's very difficult to sustain those
Is it because
interventions.
it takes enough time and effort to tap into those, reach of the people and maybe to create that awareness and stuff? It's
Absolutely.
a longer gestation period
Absolutely.
than.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have to reach the scale of population that we operate at, it's very difficult to build these parallel systems. You would rather benefit, and you would rather do well if you ride on existing government structures and setups which are already, sort of glued into communities, which operate right up to the grassroots, right up to the community panchayat village level, right? So uh, you should not have to reinvent the wheel. I think that's where the sector also finds it, often difficult, because a lot of pilots, a lot of projects end up as pilots, right? End up as pilots. We often try to create parallel structures, right? And we find that we're not able to scale it, because obviously resources are constrained, not enough funding is available. Government cannot take up every possible innovation and every possible initiative. So again, there's this, it gets sort of filtered. So only the ones which are able to survive this, the rigor, the requirements, the expectations, the persistence, right? If any of social entrepreneurship, I think three important aspects to that are required. One is patience, two is persistence, and three is perseverance, right? You have to be patient, you have to be persistent. You will fail a million times, right? But the million and one time is when you might have to wait for, right? And that, if you want to scale, then you have to work through all these structures, government structures and different institutional structures, to take it to that level.
Got it. And I think we briefly touched upon it previously, but maybe we can go more deeper on this concept of public policy, right? Like for a layman, what is a public policy and how is it different from a law and a scheme? Is it more like a public policy is reciprocative with communities' voices, or they tend to take more feedback, or what is the difference between law, policy, and
So I'm not a policy expert, but again, I'm a student of policy, having taken up a course recently. In fact, with Takshashila, doing the graduate certificate, public policy course. Um, so a very interesting term that one of our, teachers spoke about is that policy is omnipresent, right? Policy is there everywhere.
one example, where do citizens feel in an everyday life that there is policy here?
Everything in terms of, in terms of your, how you get the, when you take a cylinder, right, a gas cylinder, right? So there is a benefit there that you get, right? So it's based on a certain policy, right? In terms of usage of vehicles, right? Or the public transport that you use, right, is built on a certain policy, right? Uh, everything and anything, right, that we operate in the social spaces, right, in terms of our engagement with social spaces in our day-to-day life. I think there's policy. So obviously policy is a set of rules, a framework, right, based on which programs are implemented, how the government services are delivered to the common citizen, right, and how they're implemented for the common citizen. So this statement was very interesting for me when my teacher said that policy is omnipresent. It's there everywhere, right? So we don't realize it. We probably don't talk about it. We don't understand it as much. But I think it's important to learn the nuances of policy.
Got it. And how do you think social entrepreneurs can influence or shape policy in this place? Like, what is the degree of involvement that you would have? I know we spoke about how the structure is not very sequential and there is a scope for involvement in different stages. But on a direct term, if in case you were supposed to influence a specific policy, let's say, how would that happen?
So I think in terms of there are every business, right, every aspect of the market has both positive and negative externalities, right? Positive externality is when what you do as part of your business, there is a positive benefit to people who are not directly linked to your business, right? Negative externality is when what you do as part of your business, it has a negative implication on people who are not directly related to your business. For example, when, for example, tobacco, or in terms of, even in terms of cigarettes, or these kind of, or factories which lead to a lot of pollution, right? In industries like plastic or whatever, right? So, and that has an implication. The pollution has impact on people who are not directly related to even that business, right? So that's a negative externality. Positive externality is, for example, vaccination, right? So when the implications of vaccination on some people can have a positive influence on others as well, right? So these are both negative and positive externalities. Now there are market failures, which means that which are not, if, for example, the government is, how does the policy then come in, right? The policy comes in to be able to put a value to that, whether it's a negative externality or a positive externality. If it's a positive externality, then more of it should be done, but it's not being done because they are constrained. So how does policy help? Is that, okay, now they give those organizations which are working towards creating that positive externality with some sort of benefits,
Grants, for example.
right? Grants or any other form of benefits, right? Tax benefits, etc. If it's a negative externality, then you put additional taxes. You're putting a cost to that impact, the negative impact, for example, that those businesses have. You're putting a cost to the benefit that the positive externalities have, and hence you're supporting those organizations.
I can think of alcohol, but okay. Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's where I think policy again plays a very, very critical role, and also where enterprises, when social enterprises especially, can look at saying that what positive benefit are they able to bring, how can they work with the stakeholders both at a policy level, both, and also importantly in terms of amplifying community insights, community voices in the spaces that they operate in terms of getting those insights and letting those insights become part of the policy making process. As I said, as part of the PLCP, the pre-legislative consultation policy, you need channels which are able to reverse the flow of information, which are able to take these community voices, amplify them, ensure their voices are represented at the right forums. So how do they do that? Social enterprises, social entrepreneurs can play a very critical role in ensuring that communities have the rightful place in those rooms, right, where policies are made.
Interesting. And what's the role of think tanks, academia, and citizens in shaping the policy? I understand that social entrepreneurs have a better role or a kind of an important role to play. But thinking from an everyday person's perspective, what about these specific think tanks that we talk about when it comes to preparing us policy and such? And are social entrepreneurs a part of these think tanks, or is it separate from this? And what role does academia play? And where do citizens actually come to be involved, except for the fact that you're collecting data from them?
So, as I said, policies, they're everywhere, right? So it depends on how and where does it impact you, right? Uh, for example, the recent discussion on stray dogs, right? So there's naturally a policy that was there, not implemented, right? People are now concerned because of certain directions that are being made as part of that policy, and saying that it has to be contested. So citizens are impacted. Citizens are coming out to the roads, both for and against, right? Uh, Farm laws, for example, the farmers were agitated. Farmers were, impacted because they were not aware of the nuances, aware of the contours of these policies that were being made. So farmers came out to the roads. They contested that. They fought for it, and they obviously got it repealed, right? So you see the connect. Citizens, the moment they may not term it policy. They're talking about government programs. They're talking about certain benefits, right? Uh, you know. How they interact with the systems, and the moment they face problems with it, or the moment they face friction with it, there's automatically an engagement with the system, right? The farm laws is an example. The stray dogs thing, challenge problem is an example, and many such examples that exist. Think tanks, again, or academia, again, play a very important role because they're operating at the core of many of these systems. Think tanks work with government. Think tanks work with many of the entrepreneurs in this ecosystem. They interact a lot. So they also play a very critical role in terms of providing the domain expertise, providing the experiences from different countries of the world, right? So the global experiences that they bring forth, and they're able to share and also probably influence many of these policies. Academia, again, there's a lot of research happening in many of these spaces. So that also then brings forth evidence that's required to when policies are being made, or policies have to be sort of contested, right? And that's the power of a deliberative democracy, right? When everybody has a voice, when everybody has a voice and a space to engage, to contest, to critique, to express, right? And that's the constitutional right of free speech, right? But that has to be done in a responsible way. But there's still that right, a very important right. And I think think tanks, academia play a very, very important role in terms of driving these conversations. And social enterprises obviously are part of that entire ecosystem.
Got it. I think India is aiming to be Vikasit Bharat by 2047, right? What role does social entrepreneurs have to play?
Very, very important role. As I said, if you are talking about sustainable development goals, right, which ideally we should be working towards in all spheres, whether it is gender, livelihood, climate, right, partnerships, and many, of these areas, education, all of them, we need more and more people who are looking at working to solve some of these niggling problems, right? There's no problem small or large, right? There are problems and they have to be solved, right? And I think social and entrepreneurship in general, I think is going to play a very important role. Another important aspect is that social entrepreneurship is looked at as from a very elite sort of a lens. Oh, people studying in uh, having done whatever they could, and now they want to do something for the community, for the country, right? Coming without any sort of lived experience, any form of, including me. I don't think I've stayed in villages enough or have that sort of an experience. But the real change happens at a community level. When we look at our community champions, change makers, stewards, who operate on the ground, who belong to these communities, who have a lived experience of these challenges, they understand the language, they relate to the context and issues. I think it's about empowering them. Can we look at creating and supporting this network of grounds up change, right? If we are able to harness the energy of youth and women across these hundreds and thousands of villages and panchayats, and support them and provide them with the tools, build capacity, create alternative and interesting livelihood channels or income channels for them, we could literally be looking at a wave of change happening right from the village level, right from the community level, and that I think is a more sustainable approach, right? Social entrepreneurship should not be limited to our definition, so-called very halo definition of entrepreneurship. I think that's wrong. That's false. The real change, and these people have been doing it for many years, right? We give these new terms, but honestly, many of these change makers on the ground have been doing it, have been operating. Many inspiring organizations in the ecosystem have been doing similar sort of models. But can we provide them with the right tools? Can we provide them with the right policies? Can we provide them with the right capacity building? Can we provide them with right channels of sustainability, which means that there's no point of calling them as entrepreneurs if you're not able to provide them with income, with sustainability pathways, right? Otherwise, that's not going to happen. So how do you build that? I think the bigger goal for us as a society, as a country, as a government also should be able to harnessing this the power that's there at the grassroots level.
Got it. And we spoke about a lot of good things about policies, right? But one blind spot in Indian policy that you think that if we fix it, it could cause a massive social impact.
Again, as I said, I think I'm a strong believer. Gram Vaani has been a strong believer in the whole participatory approach, right? How do you make policies more deliberative? How do you make policies more participatory? How do you engage with citizens? How do you create channels for connecting with citizens, taking feedback from them, educating them on also informing people better about laws, about policies, remove the jargons, create simplified formats of informing, educating people about these policies, how they're impacting, leverage technology for that, and more importantly, when you take feedback, also let people know as to what part of the feedback was taken and why, so that there's accountability as well, right? So to let people know, right, and see how you can make it the 73rd and 74th amendment of the constitutions have already incorporated, or rather created, this gram sabha structures, municipality structures, right, incorporated them into the process. That's the real decentralization or democratization of the participatory processes, right? But when you look at sort of, for example, the PLCP, the policy that I'm talking about, if you are able to give it a legal mandate, if you're able to support it through legal structures, create these support structures by building the capacity of these community change makers, right? And if you're able to reverse the flow of information, I feel a lot of the challenges that happen today because people were not aware of the policy, people have problems with the policy because most of those policy decisions were taken in silos or without their intervention or feedback or without enough debate, right? Most of those problems will be gone.
Interesting.
I think a lot of time will be used in terms of improving policy,
Actually making
implementing and actual implementation and improving of these policies.
Yeah. Very interesting, right? Okay. If our listeners wanted to start in this space without leaving their jobs, what should they do?
Okay. I think, again, one thing we have to obviously remember is that it's a commitment, right? It's great that people want to sort of do something, participate and contribute. I think it's about finding those areas within your own society, within your own community. Look at areas where you can contribute. There are many organizations who are working in these spaces, like, for example, Reap Benefit with the Solve Ninjas, right? Civis has been doing great work in terms of this whole feedback from citizens on policies. You can look at local shelters, for example, animal shelters,
Rescue centers.
Animal rescue centers. My sister actually runs an animal rescue center in Devanali. So, so you can actually engage with many of those organizations, local NGOs who work on certain issues, support them in terms of even sustainability related waste collection, waste related problems, right? So you can participate in those sort of initiatives and obviously contribute. That also helps you with a lot of learning as well. But if you're looking at getting into social entrepreneurship, right? it's not a part-time job, right? It has to be full on. It has to be completely hands, legs, heart, everything in. Right? So it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a toll. It is difficult, right? Um, but it cannot be a part-time thing, right? So you have to be able to give it all, and you have to be willing, for the long run. It's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. Uh, and as I said, the three important things, right? Patience, persistence, perseverance, right?
Got it.
That's of course there with every entrepreneurship, every entrepreneurial journey,
And a little bit more.
but a little bit more when you're looking at a social life, because you will fail and fall many times more.
Yeah, because the variables involved are also a lot more.
Yeah, variables involved are a lot. The outcomes are not really, financially sort of driven, right? So the objectives are very different, right? So your indicators, your personal indicators are you have to be sort of aligned, right? So you can't expect to be a financial unicorn in the social enterprise space. At least that's my learning.
Lovely. That was quite insightful. With that, I think I'm done with my set of questions. But I want to ask one last question. Have I missed out anything that you thought I would ask you today?
No, I can't think of that. I was busy answering or at least gathering my thoughts around the answers. I don't know if I was able to address all of them in the right way, in the right approach, because most times the right points often miss your head, especially in this sort of a setting. Uh, but no, I mean, it's great. I mean, I'm glad also that, this generation especially seems to be a lot more motivated, a lot more informed, a lot more aware, right? And a lot more committed to working and solving many of these issues. And that's very heartening to know. And I think the exposure also is definitely improving, right? With sort of programs, that are available. Uh, so no, I think this is although social entrepreneurship is an extremely uh, different and difficult sort of a space. It has its own nuances and it operates at this intersection. So it's very confusing for people, because when you are a social entrepreneur, people think that you're running an NGO, right? That's the only version of a social
That's the
entrepreneur.
biggest misconception.
Misconception, right? So it's not always so. As I said, there are for-profit. For-profit is a wrong term. It's but yeah, for lack of a better terminology, for-profit social enterprises, not for-profit social enterprise, but both are social entrepreneurs, right? So I think that has to be sort of understood. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, hopefully I was able to answer the questions.
No, all my questions. Thank you so much for making time today.
Thank you very much. Lovely talking to you.